expert play, masterful gambit, sir. He played the Sabbath card. All right, let's get to Israel-Palestine.
Back as we turn to some significant news out of the Middle East. A senior Israeli official tells NBC News that President Biden's description of the latest ceasefire proposal is, quote, not accurate. The official specifically disputed that Israel has agreed to fully withdraw its troops from Gaza, a clause, the second phase of the proposal. The comment comes as far-right members of the Israeli government have voiced their opposition to the deal. President Biden announced the framework on Friday, describing it as a durable end to the conflict. The three-phase plan begins with a 6-week truce and the return of women, children, and other vulnerable hostages in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israeli troops would also withdraw from populated areas of Gaza. The second phase would see a permanent end to the war, as well as the release of the remaining hostages. The third phase outlines a 3 to 5 year period of reconstructing Gaza and the establishment of a non-Hamas Palestinian government. Hamas to this point has responded positively to the proposal, though not officially accepting it. Now the U.S. is urging both sides to indeed accept the terms.
Bro, it's so funny. It's like every time you hear American mainstream media go, well, Hamas has said that they are looking favorably at this deal. I wonder why, because it's literally fucking identical to the deals that they've presented for months now. Anytime MSNBC says this and Israel turns around and goes, fuck no, we're not accepting this deal, and they have to report on it, that is a major blow to Israel's PR in the Western world. It is a major fucking blow. A ginormous blow. It's great. I personally think that Brandon kind of cooked it a little bit, thinking that they could get away with just being like, yeah, it's actually Hamas that doesn't want a ceasefire, guys, which is what they've been doing since fucking October 10th, okay? They have lied since October 10th, being like, we really, really, really want a cooperative agreement here, and we really want a ceasefire, but Hamas just keeps fucking it up. Okay? They keep saying that over and over again, and I keep malding over and over again, but now it's getting to a point where, like, even the dumbest of Americans will look at this and go, what the fuck do you mean Hamas is not cooperating? I'm looking at MSNBC, and they say Hamas is actually looking positively at this deal. They've said it themselves. Why has this ceasefire deal been confusing? Because there is too much political pressure for unconditional support for Israel's genocide. And therefore, Brandon had to fucking come out and say something. And what he ended up saying was a miscalculation, I think. They most likely thought we could we could change political discourse once again by just simply lying and saying that, like, Hamas is not negotiating in good faith or negotiating at all. The real problem or the real confusion stems from the fine print of the deal. Israel, okay, here's how it works. Okay, here's what happened. Israel suggested a deal that looked aesthetically similar to the Hamas proposals so far to the American government. Okay? Biden then took the deal and bolded certain aspects of the deal that Israel had not agreed to or thought that Israel could, like, hide away in the fine print. Specifically, the hostage negotiations between phase 1 and phase 2 and the permanent ceasefire that comes in phase 2. The immediate ceasefire in phase 1 and the permanent ceasefire in phase 2. Israel thought that they could get away by being like, yeah, we'll do talks. We'll start the negotiations process, and we'll do the best we can to well, we won't stop fighting. We won't stop bombing, but maybe we'll, I don't know, maybe we'll start considering whether we'll stop bombing or stop fighting. Biden took that deal and was like, great, say no more, fam. It's actually fucking permanent ceasefire. When you come out swinging with those statements, obviously the population is going to look at that and go, oh, thank God Biden is finally doing something, right? Especially because so many people no longer have the same appetite for death and destruction after 8 months of baby murder. So now we're at an impasse where Israel did actually fucking present a deal, but Biden kind of cooked it by bolding some of the key parts that that people actually only care about. People don't care about the minutia of how the hostage swap is going to happen. They care about a ceasefire more than anything else. So if Israel won't cooperate on that front, then all of a sudden they're cooked. Yes, Ryan Grimm's assessment on the issue is actually pretty solid. This summarization was pretty good. We covered it before. There's a lot of manufactured confusion around these ceasefire proposals, but what happened is fairly simple. 529, Israel's war cabinet approves an offer for a ceasefire that was transmitted to Hamas. Netanyahu only agreed to it under extreme pressure and over opposition of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are not in the war cabinet. On 530, Hamas rejected it, saying no to talks unless Israel stopped its assault. Now, why did they do that? That was one of the few instances where Hamas said no to a deal that seemingly would have had ceasefire written all over it. The real reason why they did it, at least Ryan thinks, and I don't necessarily disagree with him, was because Hamas saw the amount of political pressure that Israel was receiving as a consequence of the Rafah tent massacre and knew that they could get more solidified terms on the ceasefire rather than some wishy-washy bullshit that Israel was presenting. On 531, Biden grabbed the Israeli proposal, which Netanyahu had been happy to see rejected by Hamas, and made it fully public, cleverly but accurately calling it the Israeli proposal, which it is. But Netanyahu hates it. So now Netanyahu is walking back from it while Hamas is responding positively. Now the mediators at U.S., Qatar, and Egypt are putting pressure on both Israel and Hamas to accept the deal. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, the far-right members, say they'll leave the government if the deal happens. They'll leave Netanyahu to form a government with center-right figures. The proposal laid out by Biden, however, had a major issue for Israel, which was that it had the terms a complete ceasefire on phase 1 and had the term a permanent end to hostilities in phase 2. Benjamin Netanyahu thought that they could have cleverly written out a proposal where they could actually just act like they care about a permanent end to hostilities, when in fact they would not actually remove and withdraw their forces from populated areas in Gaza, by the way, which is bullshit. It should be a complete fucking retrieval, a complete removal of Israeli forces from Gaza. So that in and of itself causes the confusion. Biden came out and in fine print said these terms. Israel then went, whoa, hold up. We just kind of faked it. Like, we didn't mean it. What do you mean? Well, what the fuck's going on? And then here's Netanyahu subtly acknowledging he did make the proposal, but what he doesn't really mean it, because he'll keep waging the war no matter what. Note the language. The prime minister, and this is in English. It's important that this is in English. Okay? The prime minister authorized the negotiating team to present a proposal to that end, which would also enable Israel to continue the war until all of its objectives are achieved, including the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities. Okay? But that's the issue. The issue is one side was negotiating in bad faith and personally thinking that they could continue with this narrative that they're doing their very best to put forward a ceasefire, but they made a mistake. And the mistake was to even mention ceasefire at all. Now, I don't know if the actual text of the deal featured these words or if Brandon added those words, but it wouldn't be the first time an American envoy has added permanent ceasefire and an end to hostilities, as we heard from the prior iteration of this deal that Hamas had accepted, which Israel said they did not accept, actually, because maybe there was a third-party involvement in massaging the narrative on whether or not the Hamas, whether or not the Israeli proposal would feature a permanent end to hostilities and a ceasefire. That is, of course, what I believe, what I suspect was the American intervention in the matter, the CIA's intervention in the matter. So now the situation is even more cooked for Israel because people are no longer, like I said, have that same fucking smoke for Palestinian baby murder that they once did in the immediate aftermath of October 7. They're becoming more and more of a pariah state. America recognizes that and is trying to fix the situation. And they're trying to do we're doing what's good for you. But what if they were actually doing what's good for Israel, they would literally just, stop giving Israel weapons and tell them to, finally start listening to America.
Terms, while cautioning that more negotiations will need to take place, especially when it comes to moving to phase 2, the permanent ceasefire.
All this progress would make Israel more secure, with Israeli families no longer living in the shadow of a terrorist attack. And all this would create the conditions for a different future, a better future for the Palestinian people. One of self-determination, dignity, security, and freedom. This path is available once the deal is struck. For months, people all over the world have called for ceasefire. Now it's time to raise your voices and demand that Hamas come to the table, agrees to this deal, and end this war that they began. Of course, there'll be differences on the specific details that need to be worked out. That's natural. If Hamas comes to negotiate, ready to deal, then Israel negotiations must be given a mandate, the necessary flexibility to close that deal.
Joining us now, retired CIA officer Mark Palmeropoulos. He's an NBC News security and intelligence analyst. Mark, good morning. Thanks for joining us. So let's get your reaction to this breaking news from a senior Israeli official who says that the president does not quite have the details correct of this proposal, particularly on the idea of moving troops out of Gaza. Do you think, from what we know of this deal, do we think that both sides will eventually take it?
Well, Jonathan, good morning. And I think, President Biden, that was a masterful play on a Friday night speech. Particularly, this is the Sabbath in Israel when some of the more, hardline members of the...
This part is so funny that they just keep going. Biden used the weakness. Expert play, masterful gambit, sir. He played the Sabbath card.
Coalition do not have access to media. And he put forth a plan, which in essence was the Israeli plan. Now, there's going to be some back and forth on this. And, you got to remember, Henry Kissinger once said, Israel has no foreign policy. They only have domestic politics. And in some sense, Biden's move was a reflection of that. But at the end, there might be some back and forth. You also have some Israeli officials over the last several days saying, no, actually, this was what the Israeli negotiating team did put forth. Don't forget that the Israeli negotiating team, along with the war cabinet, was aware of this proposal, but the entire cabinet and Israeli population were not. So lots of moving parts. I think that ultimately the two sides could get together. We've been optimistic before. The last piece on this, and I'll throw this out there, I'm not entirely sure that Bibi Netanyahu has what it takes to do this, but he has a visit to Washington within 8 weeks. There's arrest warrants out for him, but there's a chance for him to kind of reshape his legacy. Will he take this? It really remains to be seen. One tries to be optimistic. At the end of the day,
It's kind of crazy that this is a fucking CIA guy and he's wrong. He doesn't have arrest warrants out. There's an application for an arrest warrant. I don't think it came down yet. But like that's a wild mistake to make on MSNBC as like the fucking CIA guy. Like I said, though, it would be cool to follow the letter of the law and show a firm commitment. I would like to see a firm commitment by the United States of America to the rule-based international order. I demand the arrest of this war criminal whose hopefully his application for his arrest warrant will go through, and America will, in an effort of good faith, arrest this man.
There's no other plan B. So again, a masterful move by the Biden administration. Let's see what happens next. Let's see actually if Hamas can accept this as well.
Yeah, we'll come back to Hamas in a moment, but staying with President Biden and Netanyahu, it did seem like the president was trying to box in the prime minister here a little bit. We know Netanyahu's taking a lot of pressure from the far right part of his coalition to not take this deal. And he's certainly got one eye at all times fixed on his own political future.
I don't get it. Isn't this the Israeli deal? Should mainstream media not be asking that question more? Be like, why aren't they recognizing their own deal? Didn't Biden present this as the Israeli deal that Hamas must accept? Kind of confusing. That's the best part about this, though, is that Brandon used the term ceasefire, recognized that it is international pressure at play. He said the entire world is looking for a ceasefire. Now it's time for you to put pressure on your government and a permanent end to hostilities. It's over. You took the fucking toothpaste out of the tube, baby. Israel thought that they could get away with the ambiguity in terms of the hostage negotiations between phase 1 and phase 2. Now, obviously, the part of the problem here, the reason why, like, while it is a good thing that Brandon said this, the reason why I think it was a fuck up for him, the reason why I think it's a fuck up for him personally is because, like, I don't think he, I think he miscalculated what Israel would do. And I think this is going to make him look weaker if Israel continues to do Israel shit. And the rest of America and the rest of the world look to what Brandon said and the lack of enforcement on the Brandon side against Israel when Israel keeps doing Israel shit. That's just going to make him look really fucking bad.
So tell us a little bit more here about the dilemma that Netanyahu faces.
So he has the more extreme members of his coalition who are now threatening to withdraw from the government if the deal collapses. That's Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. One of the interesting things will be if does the Israeli opposition actually come to the rescue of Netanyahu. It says if he does take this deal, they'll keep the government afloat only for a short period of time. Kind of lots of moving parts here. But again, there's a fundamental disconnect between some of Netanyahu's numerous statements about finishing Hamas off entirely versus what his negotiating team put forward. Does he do something that is historic but risk his own political survival? And I think these are his calculations. Never underestimate him. A lot of us can criticize Netanyahu for good reason, but he is frankly a survivor. And so in the next several days, we'll kind of go forward. One idea, of course, is that he actually okayed this proposal knowing that Hamas or expecting that Hamas would reject it as well. So lots of moving parts. Netanyahu's legacy is on the line. And again, don't forget, this is in the backdrop of a visit to the United States and an address of Congress in the next 8 weeks, which will be have really profound effects both here in the United States and abroad as well.
Unclear if Netanyahu will also get a White House invite when he is in Washington later this summer. So, Mark, tell us about, is there a sense that Hamas will indeed reject this? Address that, and then also just give us the latest as to what Israelis' moves in Rafah might be. Tanks spotted in the center of town.
Right. So, I think a lot of this, when we discuss this proposal, kind of fails to address the notion of would Hamas accept this deal as well, because there's parts of this where it's unclear if this would be an actual full cessation of hostilities. And don't forget that the Biden administration has also, in essence, given a green light for Israel to go forward with the elimination of, Hamas senior leaders. That's a whole separate kind of intelligence, kinetic campaign. That Hamas is going to be under incredible pressure from the Qataris. I think what the U.S. is really counting on is for both Qatar and Egypt to bring Hamas to the table on this. But again, Yahya Sinwar, who in essence is calling the shots, he's deep underground somewhere in a tunnel in Gaza. What does his legacy, want to be? Is he willing to actually call an end to the war as well? So, we shall see. Finally, on Rafah, you have the Israelis, the Americans, and the Egyptians, the Qataris as well, meeting on this. One of the things that certainly the Egyptians want to see is for Rafah to reopen. But I think a lot of this has to do if Israel and Hamas can come to a deal.
Yeah, a very delicate moment in this conflict. We, of course, will stay on every single detail. We appreciate the insights this morning from retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos. Mark, thank you again.